Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the American Floral Endowment's Grow Pro webinar series. I am your moderator, Karen Schneck. I'm a member of the American Floral Endowment's Young Professionals Council and a senior research specialist in live goods R&D at Scotts Miracle-Gro. I coordinate the annual flower trials and vegetable and herb production trials for the Scotts Miracle-Gro and Bonnie plants. Today's session is on beneficial insects. On behalf of the endowment, I'm excited to be a part of AFE's Grow Pro webinar series that features a new topic every month presented by an industry expert. The webinars are free to everyone thanks to the generous support of AFE sponsors. The views and opinions expressed in these webinars are those of the speaker and do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of the AFE. As an independent nonprofit, AFE cannot endorse any specific product or opinion. Today's session is sponsored by Costa Farms. Costa Farms, located in Miami, Florida, is one of the largest horticultural growers in the world, growing more than 1,500 varieties on 5,200 acres. The company has been a family-owned and operated business for over 60 years. If you are interested in becoming a sponsor for one of our Grow Pro webinars, you can find that information on AFE's website at endowment.org/GrowPro. Today's session brings us Suzanne Wainwright Evans, presented in English. After the presentation, Suzanne will join us for a Q&A. Feel free to submit your questions through the Q&A feature or chat at any time. We'll answer as many as we can before the end of the hour. Unanswered questions may be answered through a separate email exchange. This session is being recorded and will be shared to AFE's YouTube account. Through YouTube's accessibility features, you can access closed captions in other languages. To get us started, I'd like to share a bit about today's expert speaker. Suzanne Wainwright Evans is a horticultural entomologist specializing in integrated pest management with over 30 years of experience in the green industry. She focuses primarily on biological control and the proper use of pesticides. Suzanne holds degrees in entomology and environmental horticulture from the University of Florida. Throughout her career, she has assisted businesses across the United States and internationally in managing plant pests. Additionally, Suzanne has published articles in trade magazines and scientific journals. She teaches workshops and lectures professionally to industry groups, bringing her scientific as well as practical approach to learning. She is the owner of Bug Lady Consulting, now in business 24 years. Suzanne, welcome, and thank you for presenting today on beneficial insects.
Good afternoon, everybody. I am super excited to be doing this today, and I appreciate everybody coming out in the middle of the day, of a work day, to talk about beneficial insects. And today I'm going to give kind of a bit of an overview. Sometimes when I do presentations, I do a much deeper dive into some of these subjects. But this is an area I've been doing a lot of work in lately about understanding about shipping of beneficials to make sure growers get quality product, receiving them, handling them, applying them. So I've kind of put together an overview of some of the things that growers that want to be using biological control agents should be looking at when they're doing this. So first of all, we're going to assume you have ID'd your pest correctly, because anybody that knows me knows how important I push that message. You cannot guess on things like thrips these days. You have to know what species it is. So you've ID'd your pest, you've checked your spray records, and you've actually ordered the right beneficial. So we're going to assume that's all done. But now your beneficials show up, and we're going to discuss about this receiving process. So first of all, make sure you know when your beneficials are coming. With today's technology, with automation through texting and apps, you can track your packages, and you really can prepare when they're going to show up. I hate to be that. I remember back in the day, but back in the 90s when I sold beneficials and we had to fax our orders in, and we're using pagers, and it was much more difficult to track packages then. Today, you can easily plan for when they're going to arrive, and when they do arrive, to make sure you check them immediately and not just leave them setting somewhere. Through the years, I've, seen boxes of beneficials put in the closet and forgotten about for days, bottles standing on the top of refrigerators for days. So it's really important to get them and get that box open and check things. And when you do, I highly recommend that everybody owns one of these infrared thermometers. You can order off from Amazon for $25, $30. And you want to check your beneficials to make sure they're not too hot or too cold. You want to make sure that they have been packed correctly, and if they're not, or if they were put on trucks that were not refrigerated when they were supposed to be, or, the Amazon, I'm sorry, not Amazon, UPS trucks and FedEx during the summer months, if they're not air conditioned, can get quite hot. So that can cause your temperatures to swing inside of your packages. And so when you open them, check them. And make sure, they're not frozen, nor are they extremely hot. Another thing to look for is condensation in package. This is something that can be extremely damaging to predatory mites that are in plastic bottles, because if you get that moisture in there, they can stick. Also, did any containers come open in shipments? Rove beetles seem to be one of the worst offenders for this. The biocontrol companies have gotten a lot better about having the packages that are breathable yet still holding together so they don't open it up. Also, when you check your tracking, see if your shipment was delayed or not. If it arrived a day late, that could be an issue with some beneficials, not all. But checking that and making sure the temperature is appropriate is really important. And people are always like, okay, what should the temperature be? It kind of depends, because different beneficials have different better shipping temperatures. For example, like Persimilis, they tend to want to keep them a little bit cooler because they want to keep them from moving around and using their stored up energy, because there's no food for them typically with traditional Persimilis in the bottle. But at the same time, with sachets, you don't want to keep them too cold. And sometimes they'll ship them with no cool packs at all, but just well ventilated boxes. So it's kind of a discussion you need to have with your supplier about what they're going to ship together, and for the way they ship and how they ship their beneficials, what should the target range for your temperatures be? Now, there is some discussion about should the beneficials um, be refrigerated at all. There is a study looking at Encarsia, basically showing that if the Encarsia has not been refrigerated, it actually will perform better out in your facility. But the problem is if you're shipping Encarsia across the country, in from another country, and traveling long distances, and it's late spring or summer, they could end up getting cooked because of just the packages getting too hot. So sometimes, even though it may not always be best for the beneficial, keeping them cooled during shipping can keep them from ending up dead. So again, this is something as a case-by-case basis that has to be looked at. Now, when your beneficials arrive and you take that temperature, that only tells you what your temperatures are right then. What if they had shipped and then they froze and then they were put in a warm truck? How do you track that? So data loggers are a technology that have been around for a while, but the price has been coming down on these units that some of the biocontrol companies have been using with shipments to track the humidity and the temperature as it goes through shipment. So if a grower has received multiple shipments of dead beneficials, they'll put data loggers in there to try to figure out where the problem is. I have to say I've been working with beneficial insectary to understand more about the use of these and when they use them, and it's been very interesting. And they've actually been able to track some problems with the shipping companies because of these data loggers and get those resolved. Again, luckily the price is coming down on them, but they're still not cheap enough to be put in every shipment. This is something that you should have a discussion with your supplier. Again, if you're South Florida and it's July or August, you may be like, hey, can you go ahead and throw a data logger in there if you're going to ship me bugs? Because they're coming from a long distance. The good thing with the data loggers is you can use them over and over. And ideally, the grower then saves the data loggers from each shipment and then can drop them in a box and then ship them back to the insectary, and then they can be reused. If growers are using this kind of a plan, it's more likely the insectaries will be willing to use more data loggers instead of them constantly having to buy new ones. If you really want to learn more about shipping and shipping challenges and data loggers and that information, I wrote an article back in February with Maria Diaz from Beneficial Insectary, who is their quality control person there. And Growers Talk, you can scan that QR code with your phone. And this article goes more in depth about the challenges of shipping. So once you do get your bugs, you've opened them, you've checked them, know how long before the beneficials have to go out. And if they cannot be immediately released, how long can you store them for if you can store them? And this is information you want to be prepared for beforehand, because I was at a facility down in Texas. We were sitting in the office. We were going to do some stuff with beneficials. And I kid you not, the water main going into the building burst. And all of a sudden, all our plans for the day were done. And now you've got all these beneficials. You can't get them out. So they needed to have and plan, what are you going to do if you can't get them out that day? So having that before your beneficials arrive is really important. And some of the companies have been developing these. This one from BioWorks is the one that I have used the most. It's easy to reference. It's actually a 2-page document that you can get from BioWorks, or I have it, or you can ask your biocontrol supplier. But this is basically your cheat sheet on, oh my gosh, the beneficials show up and we have to store them for a bit before we can get them out. These are the approximate ranges to store them in and how you can store them and ones you shouldn't store and what to do. Again, you don't want to set up that you're storing your beneficials all the time. This is only a contingency plan if you can't get them out. But again, this information is becoming more readily available from suppliers. Now, when you do store them, one of the common mistakes I have seen, but I have to say everybody's gotten way better, is with sachets. So when you get your sachets, most people think that keeping your beneficials cool is the best way to store them, and putting them in the refrigerator seems like the right thing to do. But when it comes to sachets, you do not want to ever put them in a refrigerator, and do not put them in an air-conditioned office. The worst thing for sachets is dehumidifying and taking moisture, because sachets really need that moisture. So stacking them literally, here, this one image is the area where they have a potting line and they have the bugs there, and it's connected to the greenhouse, so it's almost the same condition as the greenhouse. Also, for the image in the middle, it's a little hard to see, but all those boxes are actually open, because that's something else that you want to do if the box doesn't have ventilation. You can see on the left boxes how they have the big ventilation holes, because these sachets do generate heat because of how a sachet works. So you want to get them well ventilated, but you don't want them to be too cold, and you don't want them to be in a dry environment. So sachets are very different than if you have bottled products, which you saw from the chart, which, even though it may be, Cucumaris or Swirsky, you want to store them differently, and you may need some refrigeration for some of those bottled products, and you definitely need refrigeration for your nematodes, because your nematodes you want to keep around 41 Fahrenheit before you apply to store them until you're going to apply them. But don't forget, before you mix your nematodes up, you want to warm your nematodes up to about the same temperature as your water. You do not want to drop cold nematodes into warm water, because that shock can kill them or damage them, and you won't get the efficacy out of them. Another thing you want to pay attention to are dates. And yes, obviously this is a very old picture. I've been taking pictures of this stuff for a long time. you want to check the dates, and where this can confusing sometimes is the format of the date, because a lot of the biocontrol products come from Europe. And this, luckily, it's obviously the day is first, then the month, and then the year. But if you're like on June 6th, it could be the month or the day first, or if you're in the earlier part of the calendar, because in the United States, we typically put month, day, year. In Europe, it's day, month, year. And so it can get a little confusing. So talk to your supplier and make sure you understand their dating. Also, best before date, or is it a manufacturing date? Is it a ship date? And what do those dates mean as it relates to the use of your beneficials? Because everybody is doing it differently. So make sure you understand the dating on that. And so if you've stored them right and you are going to get ready to apply them, again, always just do a visual inspection. Again, check for condensation, smell. Dead beneficials smell like dead animals because that's what they are. So sometimes just smelling thing will give you a clue on the quality, and also the color of the carrier. Especially sachets. If you open sachets progressively through the weeks, you'll notice they get darker as time goes on, as they get spent. So, just check a few of those things for some basic quality checks before you're going to go apply them. But if you wanted to go a little bit deeper, um, on how to do QC, the first thing you always want to do is note the lot number. Because if you have a problem, the supplier would like to know which lot, which bag, which package it came from, so that they can backtrack it through their system to see if there was any problems on their end. So make sure you note that lot number. And again, everybody does lot numbers differently on their products. So make sure you note them. So, and I'm only going to go through a little bit of the quality control stuff right now, because the quality control stuff is a huge whole other thing to go through. But we're going to start and talk about the parasitoids. That's your Aphidius colmani, urvi, matricariae, and abdominalis. Most of you probably have not used abdominalis. That's used a little bit more heavily in the vegetable industry. But it is very important to check on these beneficials to make sure that the product you're getting is going to solve your problem. So here is method one. It's very straightforward, a little more time consuming, but basically you can get these large insect cages. The brand name that a lot of them come under is Bug Dorm, and they're made with insect screening so that these very tiny little insects can't escape. Make a note of the date you're doing this, the batch code in there, and basically you can just put a tray and dump your parasitoids out. Now, this can be different depending on what company you're buying from. Companies like Copert have a lot of carrier with their Aphidia species, where companies like BioLine and Beneficial Insectary don't really have any carrier in there. So if you're using something from Copert, you're going to need a larger tray, because you want to have the mummies all exposed and not have them covered at all with carriers, so that they have the best chance of emergence. Then you can take some honey and mix it with a little water and put it on a cotton ball, or you can make some sugar water, but you're basically simulating nectar and putting it in there. Now, again, you want to put this in the environmental conditions that you're actually going to be using your beneficials in. So oftentimes out shaded in the greenhouse is a good place to do this, and not your air-conditioned office. But basically you take an aspirator, which is what is on the picture in the bottom there, and it's basically a bug vacuum. If you're going to get into seriously doing QC on beneficials, they do sell motorized aspirators for a little over $300. Because I will tell you, standing there and sucking bugs up for a long time, it actually it's hard, because you can make yourself lightheaded for doing that, and the motorized one can help you. But if you're just doing a little bit, these $15 aspirators will work fine. But basically, what you do is when you come in each day, the wasps are going to tend to fly up in the cage, and then you can just suck them up. And you write down, okay, today we got 20, tomorrow we got 50, and then you can open the container and then release them into the greenhouse. So this is considered non-destructive sampling, so that all the beneficials you bought can be released. But then you have the challenge of knowing, you know, you're not going to necessarily know the percentage of hatch rate, because if you have a lot of carrier, you're not going to be able to go through and find all the mummies. But what you're going to do is look on the number of the bottle. And if the bottle says there were 500 mummies in here and you got like 490 parasitoids out of it, I would say that would be fine. Often beneficials companies do overpack because they realize there's going to be a certain amount of loss in transport. Um, but that is something to discuss with the biocontrol company, what their emergent expected rate is, and how much they're actually packing in there for it. Again, this can be time consuming because you've got to do this every day. You've got to come in and keep checking and aspirating them and getting them out, but it will give you an idea of how many emerged out of the packaging. Now, here's another method, which is a little, I don't say it's a little more complex, but it kind of is. Basically, you want to take these containers and I'm going to talk about this later, but at Cultivate, I'm going to be teaching everybody how to make these different kinds of containers. But basically, you want to have venting on the side so it's screened so that airflow can happen in there. And then use Fluon as a ring around the inside. Fluon is basically like a liquid Teflon. It's something that insects can't walk through. So this is a way to keep insects from walking up the container, and it will keep them either lower in the container, or if they're going to make it to the roof, they have to fly, which is kind of important about this test. But basically, you're going to mix your bottle of beneficials. Again, it's going to be a little different if you have carrier or don't have carrier in this for the parasitoids. You're going to take out a known volume, and then put it in the container. And then you're going to put a yellow sticky card on the lid and then close it. And then you are going to leave this for 2 weeks. Again, you want to have this under basically greenhouse growing conditions so they have the best chance of emerging. And then what you're going to do is you are going to look on the lid and see how many parasitoids are stuck there. The reason why this method is a little better is because it basically is going to count the parasitoids that can fly, which is important because it's not just does a parasitoid emerge out of its pupal casing, but can it fly? Because if the parasitoids can't fly, then they're not going to be able to find their food source out there. But basically, you would want to do 3 different samples and then going into some math. And again, this is why it's complicated here to give one example, because again, all the packaging is different, and how they're shipped. But basically, you can go back, know what percentage you took out, and calculate the number of wasps you have on the top of your cage to know how many were viable flying adults. So very similar for the whitefly parasitoids, um, which come in different ways. They come on cards, they come in blister packs. You can even buy just the pupa bulk loose to sprinkle in cups. But easy, simple way one is basically note the batch code and the date, put this, go hang it out in your greenhouse, wait 2 weeks, go collect them back, and then put them under a dissecting scope, and then you can hold your camera up to the eye hole and take a picture. Then go to your computer and you can zoom in and then look for those emergence holes. And so you can count how many total pupa on the card, count how many emergence holes and unemergence holes, and you can calculate the percent of emerged. This works really well for Incarcia, because Incarcia, which is the parasitoid we use to control generally the greenhouse whitefly, Triloroides, once the parasite is inside of the whitefly, it can chew a hole out of any side. And so it can come out of the back of the pupa, the top of the pupa, whatever, however they land on the cards. The problem is with Eremoceras, they can only come out of that same orientation out of the back. And so you can't calculate exactly the same because the companies know that a certain percentage of Eremoceras is going to fall upside down on the sticky cards. And so those can't emerge. So they have to add extra Eremoceras onto the cards. And that's why this can be tricky to calculate Aeromoceras, but doing it where you basically put them in a container and close them, wait, put them out in the greenhouse, wait like 2 weeks, and then just count the dead wasps laying in the container. Then you know how many actually emerged. And the company you buy from will say, hey, we expect X amount to come off this card, and then you can count. This is considered destructive sampling because the beneficials will die and you can't release them, but you're buying so many cards that sacrificing, 3 or 4 cards is worth it to check on them. But if you wanted to check about their ability to fly, not just emerge, you basically do the same setup that you do for the aphid parasitoids, where you put the card in the bottom, you put the fluent on the container, show you the batch code and date, put it in the growing environment, and then repeat this 3 times, and then count the number of parasitoids on the sticky cards. And then that can give you an idea of how many have not only just emerged, but emerged and can fly to get stuck. Granted, there may be some dummies in there that can fly and just never make it up to the top, but it will give you a good general idea on the number of parasitoids that are emerging and coming out there. And by the way, one of my biggest tips I can give you, and I'm definitely not on board with AI for solving pest problems in a sense. I ask ChatGPT questions all the time and I get the craziest answers. But this is a time where ChatGPT can be super helpful, or one of the AI programs, to calculate your math for you, to say, hey, I was expecting this many and I counted this many, what percent is that? Because we all get tired and sometimes our brains just don't want to do math. And I have found that that is a good use of AI there. Now, for quality control on mites, and there are numerous predatory mites on the market these days. The first thing I always do is just do a visual inspection. Do you see movement in the bottle? Because I have open packages before and there ain't nothing moving in there, and it's pretty obvious the product is dead. Again, look for condensation, smell, or even if you see a bunch of dead mites, if you dump it out and kind of shuffle it around on a paper with a lens, you can see if there are dead mites there. But for quality controlling them, we basically either have the loose product or we have the sachets. For the loose products, and there's a big discussion going back and forth, and I had to really shrink this presentation down because of time constraints, so I had to delete a lot out. But one of the things I had was, there's more than one way to bake a cake. There is more than one way to QC beneficials, and especially when it comes to mites. Some people prefer to measure them by volume. I am now more on the weight side, because if you have a carrier that you have mixed thoroughly around, it kind of fluffs it. And if you take a tablespoon of that compared to a tablespoon of a non-well mixed product, you can end up actually with a different weight. So you would actually have different numbers of mites in there. And I think that using the weight is a more accurate method. But sometimes you don't have scales, and volume can work to get the job done. So it can be done both ways. But again, I'm using more of the weight these days. But again, the key thing is mixing them thoroughly when you get them, because the mites, especially in those big bags of cucumaris, I've seen this where I've scooped out product and I see nothing, and then they go like to the back corner of the bag and they're having a big cuke party in the corner, and that's where they are. So mixing them thoroughly is really important. You can put them in a 5-gallon bucket, put a lid on it, and then just kind of rotate it like a cement mixer. Or Maria taught me from Beneficial Insectary, they figured out that if you take like 2 rogue beetle buckets or a little bit bigger buckets and pour them back and forth 10 times is really what you need to mix them in order to make sure the mites are homogeneously mixed between there. But then if you know the weight of the actual product, and then you take a known weight out, and then out of that known weight, you actually count the mites, you can just do the math and calculate it back up to how many are on there. And so if you're doing this like for Persimolis, Cody, who also works in the QC department at Beneficial Insectary, taught this to me, which always learning. He said, just take a white sheet of paper, open it up so there's a crease, and then sprinkle your known sample of like the Priscillus in there. And since they tend to run up, as they run up, he can smash them with his finger, and then he uses the counter and he can count them. And it's very easy to see on a white sheet of paper. Again, unfortunately, it's destructive sampling, but you're only taking a portion of the product out to do the counts on. Another way to do this is to put them on a tray, and then you can wring soap around them to kind of keep them in. And as the mites run out, my friend Kim Horton, she used to take a pencil eraser and just stab them and count them. And then you want to do this, and like the other times, you want to do 3 different samples. Then you can figure out approximately how many are in that package of mites you've gotten. Is this something you need to do all the time? No. But if you have concerns, it's probably worth doing to make sure that your numbers are there, because if you don't put the right numbers of mites out, your programs can fail. Now, for the sachets, we do something a bit different. So you get your sachets in, you store them in the open box, you store them under right conditions. Take your sachet, put it on a binder clip and stand it on a sticky card. And make sure you date your sticky card, track the lot number, because not all the sachets have their lot numbers on it. It might be on the shipping box. And then after 7 days, you want to lift the binder clip off and stick it on a new sticky card. And again, put it back out into your greenhouse or your growing environment. And you do this every week till you detect no mites on the sticky card. So when you do week 1 and then you go look at your card, you're going to see something like this. And a lot of people are like, oh my gosh, look at all those mites on there. That's great. But what am I actually looking at? And this is where spending time just looking at mites is important, because what you're actually seeing are a bunch of the feeder mites, because the feeder mites will come out of those sachets along with the predatory mites. And each week you just count the number of predatory mites that come out, and then you can chart a release curve. This is what I have my growers do then to see how long sachets actually last for. Because in some facilities, after week 4, no mites are coming out. Some facilities at 6 weeks, they're still having predatory mites come out. So this is a way to teach you if the predator, how long the predatory mites are emerging for, so you know if and when you have to replace them. So it is worth doing this, because if you're replacing your sachets too frequently, you probably could save some money because they could go a little longer. On the flip side, if your sachet's petering out too soon, then you're going out with the protection without, you're going without the protection of the predatory mites, and you can get yourself into trouble. So it's important to look close at these. Generally, the feeder mites have those darker mouth parts in the front and are super hairy. The predatory mites are more globular and are a bit larger. If you start opening sachets and looking at them under a scope, you can definitely see them to see the difference there. So if you want more information, there is the Grower's Guide of Quality Assurance that Rose Boughtonhouse compiled a few years back. There is not going to be an update to this manual, but I am working on basically combining that information with some information from the IOBC. And then actually I've been going out and teaching workshops with growers, and we're doing more of the hands-on stuff to make a more comprehensive guide. But for right now, if you scan this, it will take you to the Vineland Research PDF that you can download. But the product, the booklet I'm working on is going to be part of this workshop at Cultivate on Tuesday morning for 3 hours. Maria from Beneficial Insectary and myself, we're going to be doing a 3-hour class doing quality control stuff, and we're going to have little hands-on tables set up, and we're going to go more in depth. So if this is something you're interested in, this is the class you want to be at for Cultivate, and you are going to get basically a written kind of program or manual going through these different things with the formulas and a lot more information on how to do this for even more species. So hopefully we'll see a bunch of you there on Tuesday morning. So as far as application goes, usually how to apply beneficials, again, is a whole course in itself. Um, the evolution of application has been incredible to watch through the decades. Back again when I started in the 90s, it was just a few species and bottles, and you were sprinkling them out. But today, we've got release boxes, sachets, release cards, blister packs, blowers, sprayers, drones, and there's so many ways you can apply them. You have to look at what is right for your facility, what beneficials you're using, what kind of manpower you have, what kind of space you have. All these different variables decide which are the ways to release in your facility, because there are multiple ways often to release beneficials. The very old school is hand applying. You keep your bottles, you store them on the side. My hand model up there, Kelly Vance, who is the best dad in the galaxy, um, is showing how you rotate the bottles to mix them back in, and then you can just simply walk along and sprinkle them in the crop. This was the early days, and it's still done with a lot of mite species, with road beetles. You can do this with lacewings, pirate bugs. There's an assortment of beneficials you can do this with, but it's very labor intensive, and it's too expensive to really apply a lot of bugs these days this way. So next are release boxes. These have been around for about 20 years. And this is a way that you can put some beneficials in these boxes and then have them disperse into the plant without actually having to put the carrier on the plant. Again, it can be a little labor intensive, but this can work very well for aphid parasitoids, whitefly parasitoids. Um, you typically want to keep them out of the sun. Try to avoid overhead irrigation because you don't want them filling up with water and drowning. And think about where you're putting them next. This picture in the middle, I just happened to walk into this in a cannabis facility. In the bio box up top, they had been putting lacewing eggs, and it was right next to the sachet. And you can see where a lacewing had come out, walked right down to the sachet, and I am sure it was just sitting there eating the predatory mites as it was coming out. So always think about spacing, interguild predation, and where you're putting these release setups. Again, you can do mini mite species on this, but again, it can be labor intensive to do that. But this can work well for lacewing larvae because they can climb out, or even lacewing eggs. Pirate bugs can work well to disperse, and the parasitoids, especially aphid and whitefly parasitoids, to sprinkle them in these cups and put them around can work very well. Now, sachets are kind of where you would want to go instead of putting the predatory mites in those hang boxes. The most important thing with these sachets is to position them correctly. They need humidity. They can handle overhead irrigation. When we've done longevity trials with sachets, some of the longest lasting sachets that were still producing predatory mites had overhead irrigation. And many mite species are available in these days. Just don't do this. And I'm still seeing this where they're hung on the outside. If this was put up into the canopy of that basket, the sachet would be lasting way longer and you'd be getting a lot more predatory mites out of it. So make sure they are tucked away, hidden in that canopy there. Now there are release cards, and you can get lots of different things on cards. The top left picture, those are lacewing eggs. To the bottom left, which looks very similar, but you can see it's more gray, those are trichogramma, which are the parasitoids to caterpillar eggs. So those are dead caterpillar eggs with the parasitoids in them. For those, when you put them out, you have to think about positioning, because lacewings can't fly, so they have to be touching the plant and really need to be placed where the problem is. When you get into the trichogramma, and then the two on the right are the parasitoids for whiteflies, they can fly. So even if they're not touching a plant, they can fly and get to the pests they need to get to. So think about that when you're putting these cards out. I want to get them as close as possible to the pests we need to treat, and do they need to actually be touching the plant? Now, there are also blister packs. This is a way that can help solve the problem of the Aeromoceras. Instead of half of them being glued upside down, this way, since they're not glued, they can make their way out of the back. The challenge I find with these is employees not opening them. And you also have to make sure you do not get these in direct sun, because if not, they'll act like little greenhouses and heat up. So again, you want them opened and tucked back in the plant canopy to make sure they work right. Blowers have been a big part of now releasing these loose mites instead of sprinkling them. Um, Copert has had a few different models of blowers. This new Natrutech, which is the one blower I don't have an image of yet because I don't think it's in the US yet, but they had the press release for Horty Daily. But Copert has been evolving to improve their blowers, and so Copert does have products you can buy. BioBee is another one. The design on this one from BioBee is when they're going to be demonstrating on my workshop at Saturday at Cultivate. On Saturday, I teach an entire day workshop where we have hands-on stations, and this new blower from BioBee is where you can just snap their packaging right onto the blower and doing that, because growers just kind of want to have a tool to get the beneficials out and get them out quick. But for years, growers were making their own blowers, and I still see this. And as long as they're working, there's nothing wrong with this. But you get water jugs, you get juicy juice bottles. There's all kinds of designs. But um, you oh the other blower now, sorry, that we're going to go into is the Entomatic. They've been testing this out in ag fields in California, but now they are looking to adapt these for greenhouse. And the little video, which is quick, as you can see how the carrier has been blown out of this, because the idea is to make sure the beneficials don't get their legs ripped off and not damaged. So riding on the air currents and sprinkling them out in the crop is the way this system works. This is a higher price point to enter into, but for growers that need to cover large areas like outdoor nursery production, strawberry fields, or very large greenhouse operations, this I think is going to be the future of applications of predatory mites, because the time saving is just unbelievable that this can provide. Now, this is really important. For any blowers, you want to check them and make sure they're coming out alive. Take a sheet of poster board and have your blower pass by and check to see if you see your mites moving. And then do it again and again. Because we were doing some tests and we found out that the first blower pass actually uh everything looked great. By the second blower pass, more mites were dead, and by like the third and fourth pass, all the predatory mites were coming out dead. And it's because there was too much tumbling in the container where the actual mites were. So you need to make sure you can check them. If you need help with this, you can always reach out to me. But this is something that I do want to write an article on for one of the magazines to talk about it more. Also, we're spraying beneficials. Eggjavent is a product from Copert that is allowing us now to spray lacewing eggs out onto crops. Beneficial nematodes are another one that are sprayed. Just make sure you follow the directions. You're doing your checks to make sure everything's coming out alive on the end by catching the actual spray water from the nematodes. For the lacewings, you can put out a black poster board. You can see exactly how many eggs are going out, and then you can always check that to make sure they hatch within a few days. But following the directions is really critical for these spray products. BioLine does have a spray on predatory mite system coming that we're looking forward to hearing more about. But here, and hopefully the video is not too jerky, you can see Copert applying lacewing eggs right onto a mum crop. There. The last application is the drones. This is really being developed for outside, but I do know they're working on some drones for indoor production that will be much smaller drones with smaller payloads. But the technology is coming, because we just have to find ways to save the cost on the labor, because oftentimes the expense of putting out beneficials is the labor. So my take home message is here, check your beneficials once they arrive. Don't wait. Apply them as soon as possible. Make sure you're storing them properly. You want to check them for quality as needed. You don't need to check every beneficial all the time. And, things like Swirsky, I'm sorry, Swirsky and the foliar mites, if there's an issue in transport, you probably want to check. But if you're talking about the soil dwelling mites like Stratiolaelaps, good luck counting those. And generally, those are not things that we see problems with. They're pretty hardy. Make sure you're applying them correctly and they're actually alive going out, and then scout them to make sure they're alive in your crop. If you've been to any of my classes this last year, I've been teaching this dollar store method about how to go back and wash parts of your plants, shaking them in a jar with alcohol, pouring them through a coffee filter. And this is a way we're recollecting the beneficials out of the crops to make sure that they're arriving out there. So if you're not familiar with that method, you can always get in touch with me. But if not, again, that's something I'll be speaking about at Cultivate this year. So thank you. I only went like, I think 2 minutes over my allotted time, and hopefully you guys have some good questions for me because I'll be glad to take them.
Yay, wonderful, Suzanne. Thank you so much for your presentation. So as she said, let's go ahead and get started with the Q&A. And it looks like we have something for you. So what percentage of humidity would you suggest to store the sachets at?
Um, I would probably be like in a greenhouse, like 70% or above. Again, just not your air conditioned office, just like normal air temperature, if that's the best you can do. Just do not put them in offices, refrigerators, things like that.
Okay. How do you approach managing thrips? Is there a difference between the species on how you manage them?
Yes.
Asking for things not part of a spinus.
Yes. So yes, how you manage thrips depends on the species. You can kind of silo, and this also depends if you're looking at chemistry or biocontrol, because when you look at onion thrips and western flower thrips, the programs are basically the same. We use, Stanima feltiae in the soil. You can use cucumeras. You can use Swirsky on the foliage. Aureus feeds on them. But if you're talking about spraying, generally spinosad, which we all know conserve, we know it doesn't work great necessarily on western flower thrips these days, but it still seems to kill onion thrips. So when I cut to a greenhouse that I'm working with, or nursery or whomever, and we see thrips, the first thing is to identify them so that we can do a program appropriately. Echinothrips, which we are seeing more of those are native thrips to the United States. Biocontrol really doesn't work well for those. So we do end up tending to spray for those. But again, spinosad can actually work pretty well on echinothrips. Bavaria bassiana works pretty well on echinothrips. Parvispinus is a whole nother planet and a whole nother discussion. So that's another thing, but that takes a whole special level. And at this point, I would not be doing a predatory mite bio program for that by any means, but I definitely think in your spray program for your Parvispinus, you still want to incorporate microbials like Bavaria, Cordyceps, Metarhizium, and then have the nematodes in the soil.
Wonderful. Um, so which beneficials are the highest priority for putting out as soon as they're received? I think you showed a chart there in the beginning.
Well, that wasn't I actually had the
Oh,
chart, but I had to take it out because of
oh,
time.
oh.
So my first, if you're getting a traditional red Persimolis, that is always the first out of the gate because there's no food. Think about it. Who has food? Um, and are they in their pupa stage? Because if you think about lacewing eggs, they're just hanging out for a few days. So that's not a top priority. Also, look at them because sometimes when you get your Aromoceras or your Incarcia, your whitefly parasitoids, if they're starting to hatch, you got to get them out. If there's none that have hatched yet, you could probably wait till tomorrow or maybe the next day. But you want to look at the beneficials you're using and then think about food source and what life stage they're in.
Do you know if Incarcia formosa is not the ideal BCA for white fly control on tomatoes? This person has said they have read that they can struggle with the hairs on the plant.
Yeah,
Do you have
so
any suggestions?
tomatoes are their own special kind of problem. Like Priscillus doesn't work great, Aureus doesn't work great because of the trichomes. So yes, that can be true, but they still can work. A lot of times it's a numbers game where people will put out higher numbers to compensate for those problems. But you also too have to look at which tomato, I mean, which whitefly you have, because you can get Bemisia in tomatoes, which you would actually want Aromoceras, which Aromoceras can do a lot of host feeding and do a lot of damage. But they are used in tomatoes, but it's not the same as using them like in poinsettias.
Okay, good. This one asks, what is the ideal temperature for release of Swirsky, Californicus, and oh my God, Crylospera carnea?
Okay, it's chrysoperla. So that's late. So,
Chrysoperlin, oh my gosh.
well, I mean, ideal release temperature is whatever temperature it is to get them out.
Okay.
There's Swirsky is a Mediterranean mite. It does tend to like those a bit warmer of conditions. Um, so I mean, I guess they're asking more optimum range. I mean, like 80s to low 90s would be probably ideal. Remember, humidity plays a huge role in a lot of these predatory mites too, because if it's hotter and it's super low humidity, they're not going to do as well as if they have some humidity. Luckily, a lot of the plants we deal with, especially on the East Coast, you're trans-evaporating, so you have a microclimate of humidity on the plant, which gives you kind of a false elevated humidity on that leaf surface, which will be different than the humidity of the air of your greenhouse. Um, but Californicus on paper can handle much higher temperatures, like into the low hundreds. But that said, I don't believe, and biocontrol companies can hate on me because we've all been talking about this. I don't believe that the optimum release temperatures that a lot of the companies have on their beneficials are accurate. I think that that's a lot of older information. We don't know exactly always how that was done because we're finding beneficials performing outside of those temperature ranges. Purdue's been doing amazing work looking at green lacewings, and they're turning out to be, for cool season avid controls, an amazing tool. And they can actually hold them for 30 minutes at freezing temperatures. And then after they thaw, they just get up and go on their way. With according to the literature, that doesn't do that. So I often think you kind of have to try certain beneficials under your environmental conditions on your plants, because we are finding like Cucumaris and Swirsky don't like to be on certain tropicals like crotons. They don't like them. And Priscillus doesn't do well in tomatoes, but they do great in others. So you can't always just look at the beneficial and the pest. You have to look at the host plant too and the environment to help pick the right one.
A lot of trial and error, but
Yeah, unfortunately, but yes,
get
that's what we
to a
have to
good
do.
program. Yeah. Let's see. Are there any tips on Velifer for mite and thrip control? They have problems on.
Uh, all I heard was ficus.
Oh, I'm sorry. Any tips on Velifer for mite and thrip control? They have problems on ficus.
So if it's so ficus has its own specific thrips species, but unfortunately it causes the leaf to taco. And so the thrips are inside of the taco. So getting contact with them is very difficult. Velifer is a great product. I have been very happy with it, because not only the efficacy, it's the non-burning of the plants, because there have been challenges with some of the liquid formulations of the microbial pesticides in the plants where they're a bit hotter, where we haven't seen that with Velifer. um but I would use the same, don't spray in the middle of the day. Make sure you're getting good spray coverage, because that's really important. These are contact products. You're spraying out a spore to get contact with. um I think BASF, don't hate on me. I really think that some of the efficacy we're seeing in Velifer on mites is from the carrier more than infection from the actual Bavaria bassiana. Because we do see sometimes that the innards have insecticidal properties. But if you're targeting, again, whitefly, thrips, and root aphids, Velifer has been a very good product that can fold right into a lot of our biocontrol programs. But when back to your ficus, if it's ficus thrips, honestly, spraying them a lot with soap when the eggs are laid, because this is one of the thrip species that does not insert the egg into the tissue. The eggs are exposed, and if you can hit them with the soap before they hatch and start feeding and cause the leaf to fold, that can really knock them back. And a lot of manual removal of those leaves, unfortunately, but it is a very difficult to pest to manage.
It's unfortunate. Is there any negative effect to applying PGRs in areas where beneficials are released?
Boy, don't we wish we knew. There's only been one study done at NC State with Steve Frank, and they did look at Aphidius colemanni, a parasitizing green peach aphid, and they absolutely found that drenching PGRs, the drenching the PGRs did not affect the aphids, but the parasitoids that fed on the aphids that were feeding on the plant with the PGR, it skewed, depending on which PGR, and I can't remember exactly which PGR did what, but it's all online. You can look it up. Skewed the next generation male, or they didn't emerge. And I don't want to say male parasitoids are useless, but they kind of are, because they can't kill aphids. You need those females. I am dying for somebody to do a PGR study on the the whitefly parasitoids and Carcia and Aeromoceras to see if there's any impact. Because uh, I know PGRs are really important to the industry. And knowledge is not a bad thing. And if we do understand there's a problem, it will help us shift our programs better so can make better decisions for management. I think people sometimes don't want to find out their product does cause problems for beneficials, but at the end of the day, if we understand that, we can use everything better. And knowledge is not bad, but we really need that work done.
Sounds like a wonderful research project.
That maybe the American Floral Endowment could sponsor.
Let's see. Do you have a good suggestion for beneficials for leafhopper and T scale?
No.
Okay.
Honestly, I like with the scales, I think, PGRs, horticultural oils, watching your growing degree days to get the crawlers when they're out, using softer chemistries so that the natural occurring beneficials can feed on them. Because that's this thing we see when you get a lot away with when you stop using pesticides that have these long residues and repellencies, these naturally occurring parasitic wasps will come in on the scale, and you get a lot of different ladybirds and things like that. Oftentimes, we're using chemistries that blow out all those beneficials, but don't quite control scale pests. So, as we understand our native ecology better, and we have more selective products and time them better and help utilize our beneficials that are native, we can put better programs together on it. And the hoppers, it depends on the crop, depends on what's going on. I think in the long run, I would like to see work done with some of the microbial pesticides like Velifer on, L1, L and L2 stages, where they can be much more susceptible, and maybe even tank mixed with an IGR to slow down the molting process so those entomopathogens can get hold of them. And we are getting more products on the market, principles coming from BioWorks, and I know that a lot of the biocontrol companies are getting more involved with microbial products, so we will see more coming.
Let's see. How much percentage of pre-emergence of aphidius could be ignored?
Honestly, what I've been doing is I've been asking the insectaries what is their expected emergence rate. Like, I just talked to a company, I asked them, like, lacewing eggs, what percent do I expect to see? And they said you should get about 80% hatch on the eggs. So they pack 30% more than the number they say are there to compensate for that. And that's a discussion you're probably gonna have to do a little digging within the company because usually the sales reps aren't gonna have that kind of information, but that's information that I'm slowly starting to pull out of the insectaries, and hopefully we'll have more of that information available by Cultivate to give us a target range. Because again, every company is probably gonna have a different standards.
Cool. And for the audience left, I just wanted to note it is 2 p.m., but we're going to stick around for 10 more minutes. We still have quite a few questions to go over if you're okay with that, Suzanne.
I'm I'm here for the day.
Perfect. Good. All right. So the next question here we have is about greenhouse whitefly. Do you have any experience with banker or trap plants? They're trying to do eggplant for managing greenhouse whiteflies as a trap plant. Can it also be used as a banker plant?
Okay, so the trap plant, it depends, I think, on your crop because Graham Murphy and I think John Sanderson might have repeated this. They were trying to use eggplant as a trap crop in poinsettias. And the problem they had, because whitefly love both of them, but they could not get the whitefly to leave the poinsettia to actually go to the eggplant. And so that's, it's this choice preference thing that's happening. We all have our favorites. Everybody knows I love Coke and I'm always going to go Coke. And I don't care if there's a Pepsi down the road for free, I'm not going there to drink that. And I think this happens sometime with these pests, and especially after they've lived on them so long, they want to stay on that host plant and getting them to go to these trap crops. The concept of trap crops is amazing. The problem I've seen, and we tried to do this with bean plants like 20 years ago, we were all putting up beans as early indicators for spider mites. Everybody forgot about them. They became giant breeding balls of spider mites, and then they just became problems. The trap crops you really have to stay on top of. And just because the pest feeds on it does not mean they will leave the host crop for it. So the trap crops, not to say they can't be done, but I haven't seen anybody really do them well. I just generally don't think most facilities have the manpower to do what needs to be done. The number of them, keeping up with them, making sure they're not breeding other pests. And when it comes to banker plants, were they asking about banker plants for whitefly parasitoids?
Uh, white flies as a trap plant. Yes. Oh my gosh. And can it also be used as a banker plant?
So Lance Osborne developed a banker program using papaya whitefly for, I think it was in Carcia Sophia, to move back and forth to ornamental crops. It's a good program. The problem is you can't ship and you can't ship that program outside of the state of Florida. You can't move the papaya whitefly. So it's only possibly could be used in Florida. And then there are also some possible concerns because papaya shares some of the same viruses that some ornamental crops do. There's the question, are you going to get transmission of viruses? So there's a lot to take into consideration when you're looking at some of these programs. If you look at last year's um, biosolutions guide from Ball, I wrote like 4 pages in there. I basically took almost everything you know about banker plants and I put it in that article. And that has a ton of the information and that's still available free online.
Cool. Thank you. Okay, this person, they plan on shipping Muscitipharax raptoralis, a parasitic wasp, for fly control in stable. Do you have any advice on shipping? Do the bags need to be breathable for transport?
I know nothing about transporting stable fly parasitoids. Zero, nada. I mean, I know about them, but I've never worked because I work with plant feeders. I would think the information probably would be available online because that business has been around for decades. And if you did some Google Scholar shipments on, you know, shipping that genus, Musca, that's closely related to like the houseflies and all that, you could probably find that in there. Also, just make sure you have the proper permits for shipping because you can't ship bugs without permits from the USDA. So,
Yeah, that's a good call out. Um, which beneficial insect do you recommend for controlling mealybugs on succulents besides Cryptolomeus or
Cryptolemus. Um,
Cryptolemus? Yes.
Anymore, I'm really getting on team lacewing. And again, it kind of depends on this setup, and it's hard to know how people are growing. Um, I would do a trial with lacewing, either lacewing larva or get those spray on lacewing eggs. Because the xanthan gum, I don't think will discolor if you have blue succulents. Always test first, but we did test the xanthan gum mixed with the lacing eggs and sprayed it on color poinsettias with no problems. But if you just constantly were putting those lacewing eggs out and they hatched, and you're if it's super dry, you're not going to have probably great hatch rate, but you probably get enough hatch rate. And the eggs are so cheap to use, that if you could get them out, you might be able to get ahead of the mealy bugs on them that way. Because Cryptolemus is very expensive to use, and it doesn't work always on all species. And generally, Cryptolemus, when you put them out, the first thing they're do is heading for water because they've been in the package, they're thirsty, and generally you don't have a lot of water right there. Cryptolemus is really good for conservatories, botanical gardens, those kinds of situations. I would seriously look at using the lacewing eggs or even the larva and getting on a maintenance program.
Thank you. This is a callback to the Ficus altissima question earlier. They asked, is there an insecticidal soap that you personally recommend?
Safer's. Safer's insecticidal soap is great. I was doing work in Bermuda because they have the ficus as big hedgerows, and that's what they were doing. They would just go out with big hose and sprayers and just soak down to try to get those eggs. Um, So I'm trying to figure out where that person is because there's not much ficus left in the United States because between the ficus whitefly, that thrips, I mean, it's taken out most of the ficus.
Let's see. How do you work with beneficials when you must apply pesticides?
So this is where you really have to do the deep dive um, on understanding not only the active but the inerts. I From what I'm seeing more and more, and as we do more pesticide residue testing, I think the pesticides are having more of a negative impact than we realize. A lot of the products, when people test them, it's only like, oh, is the beneficial alive in 24 hours or 48? They're not looking at repellency. They're not looking at egg laying. They're not looking at the impact. Can the parasitoid find their host when there's all this other chemical scrambling going along with the volatiles from these pesticides? Um, I think it's a very delicate dance. I'm never going to say that we don't need pesticides and they cannot be part of a program. You just have to be very mindful. And just because a sales rep says, yes, this product is safe for the beneficials, you better ask, what beneficials are you talking about? What life stage? How was this test done? To really understand this interaction. We're getting better about understanding these interactions, but it's a very complex subject. And, part of my job now is growers have me come in and help figure out why programs fail. It's always the pesticides. It's always the pesticides these days. And something got sprayed by accident, or somebody didn't realize there was a product that was mixed in with another one. Um, and again, when you look up pesticide compatibility from BioWorks, BioWorks was doing it, and BioWorks is actually doing they're getting ready to do some more studies with their new products. But Copert, BioBest, BioLine, remember, most of these are just we sprayed it, are they alive? And not doing the deeper dive. And I work really hard to collect as much of that information as possible. And I mean that's what people hire me to do is help formulate these programs.
Let's see. This person asked, do you have any suggestions for mealybugs on grape?
Did you say grapevines? It depends on where you're at and if and which mealybug species it is. Because if it's vine mealybugs in California, you can use like Anagyrus, which is a parasitoid floret, but you can't ship that parasitoid outside of California. You can ship Cryptolemus, the ladybird beetle. Um, and there's also some mating disruption stuff that can be used, but this is where, yeah, knowing what species it is, where you're located, can make a difference on how to put a program together. And I do think, as we were talking about the sprayable lacewing eggs, I think that that is something that is going to become a bigger part of some systems like that. Because if you could go by with a sprayer and ride on your ATV down your vines and just spray the eggs out, I think that's going to be kind of a game changer for that kind of production.
Cool. I have a couple follow-up answers from earlier. The ficus grower is in San Diego County,
Oh, I
and
was
then
just there 2 weeks ago.
there you go. And then the eggplant trap crop question, that was for tomatoes and cucumbers.
Okay.
But yeah, we have one last question for you. Is there any cannibalism between Swirsky and Californicus?
Probably. There probably is going to be some egg cannibalism, but it's also a numbers game. Because if there's mites, I'm sorry, if there's like thrips around, there's broad mites around, and there's like early instar thrips, spider mites. If there's enough food, you're going to go after that low hanging fruit. If you put Swarovski and cucumbers in an arena with nothing else, yeah, they're probably gonna, eat each other's eggs and do that. But generally, you think about how much surface area is really on a plant. Um, and the chances of them really running into each other is pretty slim. There are interguild predation problems like with Swarovskis and Aphidolides, but Swarovski and Californicus is not one that I lose sleep over at night. I'd feel fine using them together.
All right, well, that's it. So thank you, Suzanne.
Thank you, everybody,
Um,
and hope to see a bunch of you at Cultivate. And thanks to Costa. Oh, I was supposed to throw up that last slide. Did you need me to throw that last
oh,
slide up?
it's okay.
Um,
I'll say it out loud.
okay. So
Don't
again,
worry.
hope to see everybody
Okay,
at Cultivate, and thank you for having me.
thank you. All right. Well, thank you for joining us for today at another session of the AFE's Grow Pro webinar series. Join us next month for Dr. John Dole's presentation on post-harvest handling recommendations for cut flowers in 2025 on Tuesday, April 22nd at 1 p.m. You can register at endowment.org/GrowPro. While there, check out our past webinar recordings, other grower-related resources, and research reports available to you for free. Thanks to industry support. We ask that you please complete the brief survey about today's session, where you can suggest additional topics and help us continue to improve these webinars. Thanks again for joining. Have a great day.